wandering far and unfettered. There is a fish in the northern oblivion named Kuan, and this Kuan is quite huge, spanning who knows how many thousands of miles. He transforms into a bird named Peng, and this Peng has quite a back on him, stretching who knows how many thousands of miles. When he rouses himself and soars into the air, his wings are like clouds draped across the heavens. The oceans start to churn, and this bird begins his journey toward the southern oblivion. The southern oblivion, that is the pool of heaven. The Equalizing Joe book, a record of many wonders, reports when Ping journeys to the southern oblivion, the waters ripple for 3,000 miles. Spiraling aloft, he ascends 90,000 miles and continues his journey without rest for half a year. It's a galloping heat haze. It's a swirl of dust. It's some living creature blown aloft on a breath of the air. And the blue on blue of the sky, is that the sky's true color? Or is it just the vast distance, going on and on without end, that looks that way? When Peng looks down, he too sees only this and nothing more. Now, if water is not piled up thickly enough, it has no power to support a large vessel. Overturn a cupful of water in a hole in the road and you can float a mustard seed in it like a boat, but if you put the cup itself in there, it will just get stuck. The water is too shallow for so large a vessel. And if the wind is not piled up thickly enough, it has no power to support Peng's enormous wings. That is why he needs to put 90,000 miles of air beneath him. Only then can he ride the wind, bearing the blue of heaven on his back and unobstructed on all sides, and make his way south. The cicada and the fledgling dove laugh at him, saying, "We scurry up into the air, leaping from the elm to the sandalwood tree, and when we don't quite make it, we just plummet to the ground." What's all this about ascending 90,000 miles and heading south? If you go out on a day trip, you can return with your belly still full. If you're traveling 100 miles, you'll need to bring a day's meal. And if you're traveling 1,000 miles, you'll need to save up provisions for 3 months before you go. What do these two little creatures know? A small consciousness cannot keep up with a vast consciousness. Short duration cannot keep up with long duration. How do we know? The morning mushroom knows nothing of the noontide, the winter cicada knows nothing of the spring and autumn. This is what is meant by short duration. In southern Chu there is a tree called mingling, for which 500 years is as a single spring and another 500 years is as a single autumn. In ancient times, there was even one massive tree whose spring and autumn were each 8,000 years long. And yet nowadays, Pengzu alone has a special reputation for longevity and everyone tries to match him. Pathetic, isn't it? Tang's questions to Ji also have something about this. In the barren Northland there is a dark ocean called the Pool of Heaven. There is a fish there several thousand miles across with a length that is as yet unknown named Kuan. There's a bird there named Ping with a back like empty tie and wings like clouds draped across the heavens. Whirling upward, he ascends 90,000 miles, breaking through the clouds and bearing the blue of the sky on his back, and then heads south, finally arriving at the southern oblivion. The quail laughs at him, saying, "Where does he think he's going?" I leap into the air with all my might, but before I get farther than a few yards, I drop to the ground. My twittering and fluttering between the bushes and branches is the utmost form of flying. So where does he think he's going? Such is the difference between the large and the small. And he whose understanding is sufficient to fill some one post, whose deeds meet the needs of some one village, or whose virtuosity pleases some one ruler, thus winning him a country to preside over, sees himself in just the same way. Even Song Rongzi would burst out laughing at such a man. If the whole world happened to praise Song Rongzi, he would not be goaded onward. If the whole world condemned him, he would not be deterred. He simply made a sharp and fixed division between the inner and the outer and clearly discerned where true honor and disgrace are to be found. He did not involve himself in anxious calculations in his dealings with the world. But nonetheless, there was still a sense in which he was not yet really firmly planted. Now, Lizzie rode forth upon the wind, weightlessly graceful, not heading back until 15 days had passed. He did not involve himself in anxious calculations about bringing good fortune to himself. Although this allowed him to avoid the exertions of walking, there was still something he needed to depend on. But suppose you were to chariot upon what is true both to heaven and to earth, riding atop the back and forth of the 6 atmospheric breaths, so that your wandering could nowhere be brought to a halt. You would then be depending on what? Thus I say, the consummate person has no fixed identity, the spirit man has no particular merit, the sage has no one name. When Yao went to cede the empire to Suyu, he said, to keep the torches burning in broad daylight would be making needless trouble for oneself. To continue watering one's garden during heavy rainfall would be pointless labor. Now you, sir, so much as appear in the world, and at once it is well ordered. And yet here I am, playing the master and acting like I control it all. I feel I am greatly deficient. Please accept the rulership of this world from me. Suyu replied, you rule the world, and the world is thus already ruled however you rule it. If I were nonetheless to take your place, would I be doing it for the name? But name is merely a guest of what is really substantial. Shall I then play the role of the guest? The tailor bird lives in the depths of a vast forest but uses no more than a single branch to make its nest. When the beaver drinks from the river, it takes only enough to fill its belly. Go home, my lord. I have no use for an empire. Although the cook may not keep the kitchen in order, that doesn't mean the spirit medium or the priest needs to leap over the sacrificial vessels to replace him. Jian Wu said to Lian Shu, I was listening to the words of the mad NJU. He talked big without getting at anything, going on and on without getting anywhere. I was shocked and terrified by what he said, which seemed as limitless as the Milky Way, vast and excessive with no regard for the way people really are. Lian Shu asked, what in the world did he say? There is a spirit man living on distant MT guy with skin like ice and snow, gentle and yielding like a virgin girl. He does not eat the 5 grains but rather feeds on the wind and dew. He rides upon the air and clouds as if hitching his chariot to soaring dragons wandering beyond the 4 seas. He concentrates his spirit and straightway all things are free from sickness and the harvest matures. I regard this as crazy talk, which I refuse to believe. That's just as it should be. The blind have no access to the beauty of visual patterns, and the deaf have no part in the sounds of bells and drums. It is not only the physical body that can be blind and deaf, the faculty of understanding can also be so. If you were then to agree with his words, you would be acting like a virgin girl who has just reached her time. A man like the one described in these words blankets all things with his virtuosity, allowing the present age to seek out its own chaotic order. How could he be bothered to try to manage the world? This man is harmed by no thing. A flood may reach the sky without drowning him, a drought may melt the stones and scorch the mountains without scalding him. From his dust and chaff you could mold yourself a Yao or a Shun. Why would he bother himself over mere beings? A ceremonial cap salesman of song once traveled to you where the people shaved their heads and tattoo their bodies. They had no use for such things. After Yao brought all the people of the world under his rule and put all within the 4 seas into good order, he went off to see 4 of these masters of distant MT guy at the bright side of the Fern River. Astonished at what he saw there, he forgot all about his kingdom. Huizi said to Wangzi, the king of Wei gave me the seed of a great gourd. I planted it, and when it matured it weighed over 100 pounds. I filled it with liquid, but it was not firm enough to lift. I cut it in half to make a dipper, but it was too large to scoop into anything. It was big and all, but because it was so useless, I finally just smashed it to pieces. Zhuangzi said, you are certainly stupid when it comes to using big things. There was once a man of song who was skilled at making a bomb to keep the hands from chapping. For generations his family had used it to make a living washing silk through the winter. A customer heard about it and asked to buy the recipe for 100 pieces of gold. The family got together and consulted, saying, we've been washing silk for generations and have never earned more than a few pieces of gold. Now in one morning we can sell the technique for 100. Let's do it. The customer took the bomb and presented it to the king of Wu. When you started a war with him, the king made the man a general who led his soldiers through a winter water battle with the men of Yu and beat them big. The man was then enfeoffed as a feudal lord. The power to keep the hands from chapping was one and the same, but one man used it to get an enfeoffment and another couldn't even use it to avoid washing silk all winter. The difference is all in the way the thing is used. You, on the other hand, had a gourd of over 100 pounds. How is it that you never thought of making it into an enormous vessel for yourself and floating through the lakes and rivers in it? Instead, you worried that it was too big to scoop into anything, which I guess means our greatly esteemed master here still has a lot of tangled weeds clogging up his mind. Huizi said to Wangzi, I have a huge tree which people call the stink tree. The trunk is swollen and gnarled, impossible to align with any level or ruler. The branches are twisted and bent, impossible to align to any T-square or carpenter's arc. Even if it were growing right in the road, a carpenter would not give it so much as a second glance. And your words are similarly big but useless, which is why they are rejected by everyone who hears them. Zhuangzi said, haven't you ever seen a wildcat or weasel? It crouches low to await its prey, pounces now to the east and now to the west, leaping high and low. But this is exactly what lands it in a trap, and it ends up dying in the net. But take a yak. It is big like the clouds draped across the heavens. Now, that is something that is good at being big, but of course it cannot catch so much as a single mouse. You, on the other hand, have this big tree and you worry that it's useless. Why not plant it in our homeland of not even anything, the vast wilds of open nowhere? Then you could loaf and wander there, doing lots of nothing there at its side, and take yourself a nap, far-flung and unfettered, there beneath it. It will never be cut down by axe or saw. Nothing will harm it. Since it has nothing for which it can be used, what could entrap or afflict it?